Yes, his father worried too much. With a last glance around him, he stepped out into the open and began to pick his way to the far side and the safety of the woods of Mirkwood. Short scrub brush dotted the landscape, twisted and warped by the winds that shallowed out the plateaus and curved the rocks into smooth, odd shapes. Remnants of large riverbeds trickled through eddies and grooves in the granite created by years of following the same paths. The going was easy and quick, but daylight was fading fast, as the young ranger jumped a deep gorge. The cut in the rock face was not more than 3 feet wide, but he could hear the rush of water somewhere hundreds of feet far below. Steadily he made his way to the far side of the wasteland. He was determined to make it by nightfall. Night had fallen hours ago, and Aragorn bit back a curse as he tripped on a rocky outcropping. The jagged rocks caught at his boot toes as he quickly moved across the boulders. He was frustrated with himself. He should have gained the wooded lands by now. He was close. He could smell the pines. How many times had he been out at night? This was no different, he chided himself. But deep inside he knew it was. He caught himself glancing over his shoulder, just waiting for Moranwin to step from behind some large rock and chastise him for being out on the wastelands at night, just as his father had warned him not to be. And yet there was no one there. Or was there? A skitter of rocks to his left caused him to pause mid-step. Silently he drew his sword and froze in the quiet moonlight. It was cooling rapidly now. His breath gathered in a hazy white fog when he exhaled. He tried to still his breathing and listen, but the pounding of his own heart was too loud in his ears. Carefully he continued moving, his every sense heightened. Someone was on the plateau with him, but they must have been downwind, because he could not tell who they were or where. The growing sounds of shuffling feet on the rocks around him ricocheted back from the granite walls. He had company. Glancing frantically around, the ranger realized for the first time that he was vulnerable. There were no trees to hide behind. The rock shelf he was trapped on had no shallows or gullies. Fear froze him in place, and he wondered oddly who it would be that he met first, the dwarves or the orcs. He didn't have long to wait to find out. A swiftly moving group of dark figures rose before him, rushing up the gently sloping rock face towards his vantage point. Starlight glinted from the tips of cruelly twisted scimitars and the odd-shaped blades of orc broadswords. Widening his stance, Aragorn raised his sword into a ready position. There was nowhere to run, and the orcs had seen him by now. The large luminous eyes, unsuited for night travel, had spotted him easily enough. Their howling banter caught on the winds and that scored the rocky expanse caused the hair on his neck to stand on end. He would never live this down if he lived through it at all, he thought darkly to himself. As the first orc gained his position, he stepped forward, prepared for battle, and was surprised to find himself forcefully thrown backwards by a smaller, moving, heavy, dark shape that had darted into the fray from his right. Dwarves! One of the powerful small cousin to men and elves had shoved the ranger out of the way, and with a fierce battle cry he slew the oncoming orc. Damn it! Aragorn hissed under his breath. He was caught in the middle of an orc-dwarf battle. Swarms of dwarves clambered over the rocks, and soon the plateau was a moving mass of chaos, as the two enemies chased each other across the expanse, engaging in battle. The sounds of clanging armor and death cries assaulted his ears. He tried to gain the edge of the cliff he was on. If he could get into the forest, he could lose them. Wading into the fray, he made for the granite lip. An orc to his left took a swipe at him with a scimitar, the blade dripping with a liquid darker than night. He didn't even want to think what the weapon had sliced through before its intention was directed to him. Bringing his sword up in a low arc, he met the haft of the weapon and cleaved the blade from its shaft. Following the arc of his swing, he spun around and stepped back into the orc, thrusting his blade into the foul creature's chest. It fell with a howl onto the stone floor. He danced over the prone body, and barely kept from beheading a dwarf that had stumbled into him, knocked senseless by an orc hammer. He lowered the small fighter to the rock. There was nothing he could do for him now. The ranger had to move, as the wave of fighting flowed across the granite and cut off his way of escape. He stood from his kneeling position, preparing to defend his location, and was assailed by the sound of arrows whistling through the night air. One passed inches from his face, close enough to stir his hair in passing. On instinct he ducked, but without protection he was at the mercy of luck, and she had long ago left the plateau for saner regions. An arrow bit deeply into his right thigh and dropped him to his knees. He stifled a cry as he rose to his feet once more. An orc loomed up over him, and he staggered back, narrowly avoiding the thick slashing blade. Thrusting his own sword before him, he caught the enemy's weapon with his, and held the beast off. The orc's strength surprised him as it pressed the human down with the steel edge. Two dwarves jumped on the back of the creature, attacking its crude armor and bearing the beast to the ground. Aragorn attempted to rise once more, but his balance was off, and he was precariously close to the edge of the plateau. He moved unsteadily, trying to force his injured leg to bear the weight. As he got his balance and began to move back into the battle, the orc before him rose up, throwing off the dwarves as though they were nothing. One of the compact, heavy bodies slammed the ranger full in the chest. The wind was forced from his body, and he was thrown backwards by the impact. His feet lost contact with the rock face, and he was free-falling through the night air. He realized with calm clarity that the collision with the dwarf had pushed him off the plateau, and he was falling from the heights. Chapter 2. Uncertain Beginnings. Legolas had followed this pack of orcs since they had left the edges of Mirkwood. That they had ventured there at all was of great concern to the elven prince. His father was Thranduil, lord of Mirkwood, and rumors of orcs venturing into the woods had drawn his concern. The Elven King had sent several of his warriors to investigate the situation, and his own son, Legolas, had volunteered to go. If orcs had dared to enter their realm, even to escape the dwarves that hunted them, then drastic measures were needed. Northern Mirkwood was still a safe place, and Thranduil would not see it desecrated by the evil that was overtaking the land. Legolas himself had no care for either orc or dwarf. If they chose to annihilate each other and themselves, that was all well with him. But Mirkwood must be made off limits to their encroaching, and so he had readily volunteered to go out and find out what was happening in the wastelands. It had been some time since he had last ventured out past his father's realm. It would be good for him to go on to this short foray. The elf prince had reached the base of the rocky plateau where the battle had reached a fevered pitch. True, they had chosen a site well away from Mirkwood, but her borders were still too close in the elf's estimations. Quietly and cat-like, he leapt into the branches of the pine tree above him. He wanted to get a better look at what was going on between the two warring parties. It could be advantageous if he could identify which clan of dwarves it was that decided to take on the orcs during their nightly runs. He had started to climb higher when a shout drew his attention directly overhead. Someone had slipped from the rock and was hurtling towards him, crashing through the branches of the trees above him on its fall from the heights. Nimbly the elf jumped from his vantage point, and quickly moved into the foliage at the base of the large tree. Drawing his bow, he crouched in the concealed position as the body fell to the forest floor with a heavy thud. Aragorn twisted in midair. He needed to stop his descent. He had been thrown too far from the rock face to grab any of the roots or outcroppings that might have stopped him. A dark conical shape formed in the sight below him. A pine tree. He had indeed gained the edges of the forest. He curled in on himself and hit the upper branches of the tree, trying to protect his face and chest from the pine needles and wood that caught at him, tearing at his clothes and leaving cuts on any exposed skin they came into contact with. The branches slowed him some, but as he fell closer to the ground they grew thicker and did not bend under his weight. A large branch caught his head and split his temple. Brilliant pinpricks of starlight shot through his sight, and everything spun out of control. His body went limp as he began to lose consciousness. But it was not soon enough. The shaft of the arrow embedded in his thigh snagged on a branch and was torn from his leg. It opened a nasty gash as it was jerked from his body, but the head of the arrow broke off near the bone and remained embedded. He cried out, but it was silenced immediately as his body folded over a limb as thick as a man was wide, and the air was again crushed from his lungs. Silently he slipped from where he had landed and dropped to the forest floor, unconscious. The elf crept out from his hiding place. His bow was strung, and he advanced warily on the creature that had fallen from the tree. Cautiously he walked around the dark, still form. It didn't smell like an orc, and it was too large for a dwarf. Legolas resheathed his arrow and slung his bow over his shoulder. He knelt beside the fallen ranger and gently turned the man over on his back. The sounds of the battle above receded as the dwarves chased the orcs back to their hiding places. He regretted losing their trail, but he had enough information to verify the reports and let his father know what was happening to their western border. The man on the ground moaned softly, and Legolas returned his attention to him. He looked like a ranger, But all the rangers the elf knew would never be caught in the wastelands at night, not with orcs and dwarves at war with one another. He was tempted to leave the man where he lay. His arrogance had gotten him into this mess. He deserved to be left on his own.